The sun had barely risen over the smoldering ruins of what was once a thriving city. Streets once alive with the bustle of humanity now lay silent, the air heavy with the acrid stench of burning metal and charred flesh. The war had taken everything: homes, families, hope. But humanity? Humanity wasn't done yet. Seraphina Aldrich stood atop a crumbling skyscraper, staring out over the devastation. She was a figure hardened by years of combat, her eyes steely and unflinching, despite the grim sight before her. At just 26, she had more kills to her name than most seasoned veterans. She was the epitome of what humanity had become in the wake of the alien invasion, a relentless force of nature that refused to bow. Her fingers gripped the edge of her sniper rifle, the polished metal a contrast to her grim demeanor. "Ready," she muttered to herself, even though no one else was around to hear. Her breath steady, heart cold, she set her sights on the massive alien vessel hovering above the ruined city. The Gorrath fleet, a nightmare from the deep void, had arrived a day earlier and claimed this city as their own. They had come for one reason: Earth's resources. The Gorrath, a race of brutal conquerors, had been carving their way through the galaxy, extinguishing civilizations like wildfire. And yet, despite all the odds, Earth stood defiant. Humanity wasn't the largest or most technologically advanced species in the galaxy, but it was resilient. And that's what terrified the Gorrath. A sudden hum in the air drew Seraphina's attention. She looked up, eyes narrowing. Her comms unit crackled to life with a voice she had learned to trust. "Seraphina, you're not gonna like this," came the voice of Captain Roderick Kane, leader of the Human Resistance's elite strike team. "We've got a situation. One you need to see." Seraphina's lips twisted into a slight frown. She didn't like the sound of that. "What's going on?" "There's been a leak. The Gorrath have a mole. And it's someone inside the Resistance." Her heart dropped. A mole. There were few things worse than betrayal from within. And if the Gorrath had infiltrated their ranks, everything they had worked for, their last bastion of hope, was at risk. "I'm on my way," Seraphina snapped, shoving her rifle into her holster and sprinting toward the rooftop access. She vaulted down a few flights of stairs, her boots slamming against the concrete in rhythm with her pounding heart. The weight of the rifle felt insignificant now, dwarfed by the gravity of the situation. As she exited the building and into the street, she passed the remnants of her fallen comrades, burned bodies and broken armor scattered among the wreckage. Her squad, once a proud unit, had been decimated in the last offensive. Yet here she was, still standing, fueled by a single desire: survival. Seraphina's mind raced as she boarded the nearest transport, a hulking armored vehicle that hummed with the low growl of its engine. She'd never seen Kane like this before. The captain was the type who always seemed to have a plan. But a mole? That was something new. The vehicle sped through the wreckage, its tires kicking up dust and debris. Seraphina's mind was already working, playing out the possible scenarios. If the mole was embedded deep within the Resistance, there was no telling how much damage had already been done. It was only a matter of time before the Gorrath exploited this weakness. She arrived at the underground base minutes later, the air inside tense with the crackle of distress. Her eyes scanned the room, a dimly lit command center with maps, screens, and flashing indicators. Captain Kane stood near the center, his face twisted in a rare expression of frustration. Beside him was Sergeant Jonas, a hardened veteran with an eye patch and an unnerving calm. "We've got a problem, Seraphina," Kane began, his voice low. "Our intel says the Gorrath have access to our comms, our supply routes, everything. Someone inside is feeding them information." Seraphina's gaze hardened. She had no time for games. "Who?" "We don't know yet. But we've narrowed it down to 2 suspects," Kane said, gesturing to the 2 figures standing in the corner. One was Commander Laris, a stoic officer who had been with the Resistance since its earliest days. The other was Lieutenant Drayden, a charismatic leader known for his strategic brilliance but equally questionable loyalty. "I'll handle it," Seraphina replied, her tone decisive. "You sure?" Jonas asked, his gravelly voice cautious. "This isn't just some field op. This is..." Life or death, Seraphina interrupted, cutting him off. I know. And I'll make sure the right person pays. Kane gave a solemn nod. Just don't rush this. We can't afford mistakes. Seraphina didn't wait for any further instructions. She turned on her heel and made her way to the holding room where the two suspects were waiting. The atmosphere was thick with tension as she entered. Commander Laris, a grizzled man in his late 40s, sat rigidly at a table. His sharp eyes met hers, but he said nothing. Lieutenant Drayden, on the other hand, leaned back in his chair, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. I know why you're here, Drayden said, his voice smooth and taunting. Looking for a scapegoat, are we? Because you think it'll be easier to blame one of us than face the truth? Seraphina's eyes narrowed. Shut up. This is about saving humanity, not your ego trip. You think one of us is a traitor, Laris said, his tone cold but measured. But let's not kid ourselves. This war was lost the moment the Gorrath set their sights on Earth. Seraphina's fists clenched. She couldn't afford to let herself be distracted. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to find out who's been feeding intel to the enemy. Drayden leaned forward, his smile still in place. And if I tell you it wasn't me, what then? You'll believe me? Or will you just kill the messenger? She didn't hesitate. The question was rhetorical, but the response wasn't. A sudden beeping noise interrupted the standoff. One of the techs burst into the room, his face ashen. We've just intercepted a message. It's coming from inside the base. Someone just gave away our position. Seraphina's blood ran cold. The mole had struck again. The base was a labyrinth of steel and concrete, designed for survival, built with one purpose in mind, holding humanity's last line of defense against the Gorrath. But now, it felt like a tomb. The energy in the air was thick, suffocating, and the hum of the lights above did little to mask the tension brewing in every corner. Seraphina paced through the corridors, her boots echoing in the silence. Her mind raced. Who could the mole be? Was it Laris, whose cold demeanor had always felt calculated? Or Drayden, with his charm and easy smile that could hide anything? Both had their motives, and both had the means. But they couldn't both be guilty, could they? She had made her decision. They would both face interrogation, but there was no time to waste. The Gorrath were already closing in. Inside the command center, Captain Kane was staring at a holomap that flickered with grim urgency. His fingers ran across the interface, zooming in on Earth's topography. I've rerouted all our resources to the southeast. We've got a fortified outpost there. But the Gorrath, they're too damn fast. Seraphina didn't need to hear the rest. She could see it in his eyes, desperation, fear. But she couldn't afford to feel either. Not now. I'll take the southeast outpost, she said, her voice unwavering. Gather the strike team. We need to buy time. Kane didn't flinch. He gave her a single nod, but there was a weight in his gaze. He didn't want her to go. You know the stakes, Seraphina, he warned. The Gorrath aren't just invading anymore, they're coming for the final strike. If we lose that outpost, they won't. Her response was clipped, focused. Not if I have anything to say about it. Before Kane could respond, Sergeant Jonas stepped forward, his face set in grim determination. His body was covered in scars, each one a testament to the battles he'd fought. We'll need air support. If they send in a dreadnought class, we won't stand a chance without it. Seraphina didn't hesitate. Get on it. If we need to fall back, we'll use the tunnels. But that outpost stays ours. The strike team was already assembling as she made her way toward the transport hangar. She could feel the weight of every decision, every second that ticked away. The Gorrath were relentless, but so were they. It was the only thing they had left. As the team suited up and climbed into their transports, Seraphina's thoughts remained focused on the one thing that mattered: survival. She knew that getting to the outpost wasn't going to be easy. The Gorrath weren't just merciless, they were strategic, calculating. They wouldn't charge in recklessly, not this time. The transport door slammed shut with a metallic thud, and they were off, tearing through the war-torn landscape. The sky above was black with the looming threat of the alien fleet, their shadows darkening the horizon. There was no safe place, no place untouched by their invasion. 5 minutes out. Jonas's voice crackled over the comms. Seraphina looked out the transport's viewport. In the distance, the outpost loomed, a concrete fortress surrounded by barbed wire, makeshift barricades, and shattered remnants of what used to be a thriving city. It was humanity's last stand in this region. But even from this distance, she could see the flashes of enemy gunfire in the distance. The Gorrath were already here. "Brace for impact!" Jonas shouted. A sudden explosion shook the transport, and the ground below seemed to split open as enemy artillery struck the earth with devastating force. The transport jerked violently, but Seraphina was already on her feet, her hand gripping the side rail for stability. The transport touched down with a heavy thud. The door slammed open, and the strike team surged forward, weapons raised, the sound of their boots pounding against the cracked pavement deafening. Seraphina's heart raced, but her focus remained sharp. The Gorrath weren't the only enemy here. Time was a constant threat, ticking away as they fought to buy enough time to regroup. She motioned for her team to fan out. "Watch your six," she barked. "Don't let them surround us." They moved with practiced precision, their eyes scanning the horizon for the enemy. The Gorrath were known for their terrifying speed, and the last thing Seraphina needed was to be caught off guard. As her team took positions, she noticed something, movement on the far side of the outpost. A shadow, too quick to be human. She didn't hesitate. "Over there!" Seraphina shouted, pointing. "Go!" Jonas led the charge, his heavy assault rifle kicking up dust as he fired at the moving target. The rest of the team followed, and Seraphina wasn't far behind. The air was thick with the sound of gunfire, the low hum of energy blasts, and the crackle of distant explosions. It was a symphony of war, and Seraphina was its conductor. They reached the source of the movement, only to find an empty corner of the outpost. "What the hell?" Jonas muttered, lowering his weapon. Seraphina's instinct screamed that something wasn't right. She turned sharply, scanning the surroundings. A sudden hiss came through her earpiece, a garbled transmission. "This is command, breach imminent, location compromised." The words barely registered as Seraphina's heart skipped a beat. The mole. The traitor. Had they known their movements? Had they set them up? She whirled on Jonas. "Get back to the transport, now!" But it was too late. The ground shook violently beneath their feet, and the sky above split open as a massive Gorrath dreadnought-class warship descended like an iron fist from the heavens. The heavy thud of its landing sent shockwaves through the ground, throwing Seraphina off balance. A dozen Gorrath soldiers, their bodies covered in dark, gleaming armor, stormed the perimeter with brutal efficiency. The battle was no longer about holding the outpost, it was about survival. "Fall back!" Seraphina shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. The strike team engaged with relentless fury, but Seraphina knew they were outmatched. The Gorrath had come prepared, and their numbers were overwhelming. Seraphina pulled her sidearm from its holster, firing at the advancing soldiers as she moved backward, her eyes scanning for any weak points in the enemy's formation. But there was none. They were closing in. "Not like this," she muttered under her breath. But as she turned to regroup with her team, a single thought gnawed at her, a thought that shook her to her core. Had the mole just led them straight into a trap? The battlefield was chaos incarnate. The deafening roar of gunfire, the shriek of energy blasts cutting through the air, and the sharp tang of burning ozone mixed in the thick, acrid smoke that choked the remnants of the outpost. Seraphina Aldrich barely had time to process the ferocity of the enemy's assault before another barrage hit, shaking the earth beneath her feet. She ducked behind the ruined wall of a collapsed bunker, her pulse hammering in her chest. Sweat slicked her brow, her breath coming in quick, shallow gasps. Every moment felt like an eternity as the Gorrath pushed closer, their relentless advance too coordinated, too precise. They knew where she was. They knew where her team was. And it all pointed back to one ugly truth: the mole had set them up. Seraphina! Jonas's voice crackled over the comms. His voice was strained, grating with tension. We've got heavy artillery incoming. We need to fall back now, or we're all dead. She could hear the sounds of desperate firefights in the background, the sharp bark of her soldiers' weapons against the booming firepower of the Gorrath. But Seraphina's mind was racing, her focus locked on a single thought: how the hell had they gotten so much intel? Negative! Seraphina responded, her voice cutting through the chaos. We're not retreating. We're not letting them win. Her grip tightened on her rifle, knuckles white. She could feel the weight of the responsibility pressing down on her shoulders. The Gorrath weren't just an enemy, they were a symbol of everything humanity had fought against, everything they had lost. The thought of retreating, of conceding to the alien invaders, sickened her. Her eyes flicked across the battlefield. Her team was scattered, pinned down in pockets of resistance, holding their ground as best as they could. But they were surrounded. And then, the unmistakable sound of the Gorrath war machine arrived. The low, vibrating hum of their massive warship's engines made the ground tremble. She looked up. It was the Dreadnought-class ship, the size of a small city, descending from the darkened sky like an asteroid. The ship's lower hull lit up with a burst of energy as it deployed more troops, their armored figures already advancing with terrifying speed. The time for hesitation was over. Jonas, I need air support. Now! Seraphina ordered, her tone sharp, commanding. On it! Jonas's voice responded with grim resolve. There was no question now, this was a fight they couldn't win without help. Seraphina took a deep breath, willing herself to stay focused. She scanned her surroundings once more, her sharp eyes landing on an overturned transport vehicle nearby. The Gorrath had left it relatively untouched, no doubt considering it a non-threat. But to Seraphina, it was the perfect vantage point. Team on me! She barked. She didn't wait for a response. She sprinted toward the vehicle, her boots pounding against the cracked ground, her rifle held tight against her body. Her soldiers fell into step behind her, moving with purpose. No time for hesitation, no time for fear. They reached the transport in seconds. Seraphina vaulted over the wreckage, landing behind its twisted frame, her team forming a defensive perimeter around her. She could hear the hum of their weapons charging, ready to fire. Time to give them hell, she muttered under her breath. Just as she set her sights on an advancing squad of Gorrath soldiers, the sky erupted with the deafening roar of fighter jets. The Resistance's last remaining squadron had arrived. Their sleek, jagged ships sliced through the air like angry wasps, launching precision strikes against the Dreadnought's forces. The air around them was filled with a storm of explosive fire, missiles screaming across the battlefield, slamming into Gorrath forces. The tide had shifted. Cover fire! Seraphina shouted, her rifle barking as she downed 2 Gorrath soldiers in rapid succession. Her soldiers responded in kind, unleashing a barrage of gunfire at the advancing enemy. Each shot was an act of defiance, an embodiment of humanity's refusal to bend. But as the battle raged on, a sudden shift in the air brought a gut-wrenching realization. A figure appeared on the battlefield, moving through the smoke with unnatural speed. It was humanoid but distorted, armored in shimmering black plates, the signature of Gorrath elite forces. The soldier's helmet reflected the harsh light, its eyes hidden behind a dark visor. The figure moved with eerie precision, and Seraphina's instincts screamed that this was no ordinary soldier. Jonas, take cover! Seraphina shouted, barely able to make herself heard over the chaos. But it was too late. The Gorrath soldier, with unnatural strength and agility, tore through the ranks of the Resistance, cutting down 3 soldiers before they even had time to react. It wasn't just their weapons, it was their coordination, their ruthlessness. This was the enemy's best. Fall back! Seraphina shouted, but the order was swallowed by the roar of combat. As she moved to cover one of her wounded soldiers, a flicker of movement caught her eye. The Gorrath elite soldier was closing in, its gleaming blade raised. There was no room for fear, no time to hesitate. This was it, either she took down this threat, or all was lost. With a roar of fury, Seraphina charged, her rifle transforming into a blur of motion as she fired. The Gorrath soldier parried the first shot with a deft flick of its blade, but Seraphina was already on the move, closing the gap. She dropped low, throwing herself into a roll as the soldier slashed down, missing by inches. Seraphina's body screamed as she sprang to her feet, pulling a grenade from her belt. She didn't have the luxury of a clean shot. With a single, fluid motion, she tossed the grenade at the soldier's feet. "Goodbye," she muttered. The explosion rocked the battlefield, the shockwaves slamming into Seraphina's chest like a freight train. She barely stayed on her feet, but when the dust cleared, the Gorrath elite soldier was down, its body mangled and lifeless. But the victory was short-lived. The Dreadnought-class ship above released another volley, and the remaining Gorrath forces regrouped, their numbers overwhelming. Seraphina looked around, her vision blurry from the blast, but the truth was clear. They had fought valiantly, but there were too many. "Captain Kane!" she yelled into the comms, her voice ragged. "We need immediate extraction, or we're finished." The response crackled in her earpiece, filled with static, but then the familiar voice of Kane came through. "We're coming, Seraphina. Hold on." The final showdown was only just beginning, and as Seraphina Aldrich fought to survive, one thing was clear: humanity's fight was far from over. Seraphina's breath was ragged, each inhale sharp with the sting of blood and smoke. The ground around her was a battlefield, scarred by explosions and littered with the bodies of fallen soldiers, both human and Gorrath. The Dreadnought-class ship hovered above, its massive guns preparing to fire another devastating salvo. Time was slipping away, and every second that passed brought them closer to extinction. Her comms crackled to life, the distorted voice of Captain Kane breaking through the static. "Seraphina, we've got a window. The Gorrath fleet is distracted. We're coming in hot. You need to buy us more time." Seraphina gritted her teeth. She was running on empty, physically, mentally, emotionally, but she wasn't about to let her people down. Not after everything they had fought for. The battlefield was far from over, and she still had one last card to play. Her rifle was almost out of ammo. Her grenades were gone. But she had something the Gorrath didn't: human tenacity. With the sound of jets roaring overhead, Seraphina's gaze flicked to the perimeter, where her squad had been pushed back. Jonas and a handful of soldiers were still holding their ground, fighting tooth and nail, but they were outnumbered. Outgunned. "Jonas!" Seraphina's voice rang out, though she knew he couldn't hear her over the deafening clamor. She turned to him, but her words had to cut through the air like a blade. "We need to pull back to the tunnels. We won't win this fight above ground." Jonas's eyes met hers through the smoke. There was hesitation, fear maybe, but there was also something else. Something he had seen in her eyes. The same fire that refused to be extinguished. Without another word, he nodded, signaling to the remaining soldiers. They began retreating under heavy fire, ducking behind the rubble and fallen debris, sprinting toward the last hope of humanity, the tunnels beneath the outpost. Seraphina followed, the weight of her rifle dragging her forward like an anchor. The earth rumbled beneath their feet as the Gorrath artillery launched its next wave, but they pressed on, moving quickly, pushing themselves further and further into the underground labyrinth. As they descended, the harsh, burning light of the battlefield faded, replaced by the cold, flickering hum of the outpost's emergency lights. The tunnels felt like a grave, but it was the only place they could survive now. When they reached the inner chamber, Seraphina took a moment to breathe. They were in the belly of the beast, sheltered for now. "We'll regroup here," she said, her voice steady but hard. "We'll need to make a stand. Kane's not going to get here in time. We're on our own." Jonas and the others moved swiftly, setting up makeshift barricades and checking their weapons. The silence of the tunnel was deafening after the chaos above, but Seraphina's mind was still racing, her thoughts on the battlefield. They weren't alone down here. Somewhere, deep in the darkness, were the remnants of their resistance, survivors of other battles, waiting for a chance to strike back. We won't go quietly, Seraphina muttered under her breath. Above ground, the Gorrath forces had finally regrouped. The Dreadnought-class ship hovered ominously in the sky, casting its shadow over the crumbling outpost. The alien warlord had come down from his command ship, a towering figure clad in heavy black armor, his presence radiating power. Seraphina knew who he was. Vargoth. The name had become synonymous with destruction. A cruel warlord whose reputation stretched across the galaxy. He had laid waste to countless planets, and now, Earth was next. She couldn't allow him to claim victory. Listen up, Seraphina said to her team as they prepared to make their last stand. This is our home, and we're not letting it fall today. We're going to take down Vargoth and give humanity a fighting chance. The soldiers around her nodded. No more fear. No more hesitation. Only one goal. As they readied their weapons, Seraphina moved to the front, eyes narrowing. Vargoth's forces were massive. But they had an advantage: humanity's resilience. The Gorrath may have had superior firepower, but humanity had something deeper. Something unquantifiable. Jonas was the first to spot movement. Gorrath soldiers moved toward the tunnel entrance, their bulky frames silhouetted against the flickering lights. It was now or never. Seraphina didn't hesitate. Engage! She barked, her voice a crackling command. Gunfire erupted like a thunderstorm. Explosive rounds lit the air, ricocheting off metal walls, striking their targets with brutal precision. Her team poured everything they had into the Gorrath ranks, slowing their advance, buying precious seconds. Seraphina's eyes darted across the room. She needed a way out, a way to shift the momentum. And then she saw it. A massive power conduit, glowing with blue energy, was exposed just above the tunnel's entrance. It was their best shot at taking out the Gorrath's forces and cutting off their reinforcements. She could feel the adrenaline surging through her veins as the plan formed in her mind. Jonas, cover me! Seraphina shouted as she sprinted toward the conduit. On it! Jonas's voice rang out, and the world exploded into chaos once more. With a ferocity born of desperation, Seraphina slid beneath the conduit, her heart pounding. She pulled a satchel charge from her belt and attached it to the base. She set the timer with trembling hands, each second a countdown to death. 2 minutes! Seraphina shouted over the roar of battle. As she retreated toward her team, the Gorrath forces closed in, their soldiers advancing with unnatural speed. The weight of the battle was pressing in on her chest, but she focused only on the task ahead. When she reached Jonas, she gave him a single nod. Get ready! The charge detonated with a deafening blast, sending shockwaves through the tunnel. The walls trembled, and sparks flew as the power conduit exploded, severing the Gorrath's supply lines and causing a massive chain reaction. The tunnel was momentarily lit in a burst of blinding light before plunging back into darkness. The Gorrath soldiers faltered, their coordination thrown into disarray. Seraphina seized the moment. Push forward! She screamed. The resistance surged, attacking with everything they had left. But the battle was not over. Vargoth was still there. The warlord's massive frame loomed over the battlefield, his dark eyes glowing with malevolent power. Seraphina Aldrich! Vargoth's voice rumbled, deep and resonant. You fight bravely. But your fight is over. He raised his weapon, a massive energy blade that crackled with dark energy, and charged. Seraphina's heart pounded, but she didn't retreat. She was the last line of defense, and this fight was hers. Not today, Vargoth! She snarled, sprinting toward him. The final showdown was brutal. Metal clashed against metal, fire met fury. And in that moment, Seraphina knew something. Humanity might be small, fragile, but it was the hardest thing to break. With a final, desperate strike, Seraphina's blade found its mark. Vargoth's roar echoed through the tunnels, his body crumpling under the weight of her will. He fell, the warlord's reign over Earth coming to an end. But the cost had been high. The outpost was gone. Her team was scattered, battered, but they were alive. And for now, that was enough. Humanity had won this round. The fight was far from over, but Seraphina knew this. As long as they had breath, they would never stop fighting.